Hello, Andy. How are you today?
I'm good, Luke. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Nice to actually have you on video for a change. It's rather than just audio.
I know it's
Uh,
scary.
Another video call for you. How many video calls have you done in the last
Oh my
two
gosh,
years?
so many. I'm so over it. Um, you know, and I don't know about you, but when you're on a video call, where do you look? Where do you look? Because it's so difficult not
Mm.
to look at yourself.
Hmm.
And I try and look at the person who's speaking, but when I'm the one that's speaking, where do I look? Do I look at you? Do I look at myself? Do I look at the camera? It all gets a bit weird.
It is
Uh,
weird, isn't it? And
and then
when you're recording like a video episode like this, also I'm thinking about where do I look, because obviously I'm
yeah.
looking at you right now, but for the video viewers I'm looking over here, and I should probably be looking here,
Should be looking at the camera, yeah.
right? And then sometimes when I'm doing video I have some notes on the screen, so I'm
Mm,
talking to the audience, but I also have to read the notes, so it's kind of like, where am I looking? Yeah, it all
yeah.
gets a bit confusing.
I did a whole thing. I wrote a whole blog post about this, about how you should be able to switch your camera off, and there should be no pressure to have your camera on calls. I mean, I appreciate for this that it makes sense, because if you had your camera on and I had my camera off, that would just look really weird. But I mean, I had a call like back in the summer, and we were talking about quite high level stuff at work, and it was in the morning, and I think we were homeschooling at the time, and my kids hadn't got dressed yet, and I heard one of them coming upstairs, and I knew that he would arrive in this room naked, because that's his thing. He's 3 years old, or 3 years old at the time, and so he just spends half his time without any clothes on. So I just switched my camera off, because I didn't, it's just not appropriate for my colleagues to see my son
Yeah.
wandering around in the buff. And and after a couple of minutes, like, one of the people's like, "Oh, can you put your camera on? We need to see you, because what we're discussing is really important." And I was like, "No, I can't. I can't do that." And it just, I remember it annoyed me quite a lot. Why do you have to have the camera on for you to understand that I'm listening and engaged and all those kinds of things? I just thought it's unnecessary. So yeah, I'm leading the charge. I think we should be able to switch our cameras off if we like, if we're going to be
And
working virtually like this.
you didn't want to have to say, well, I would put my camera on, I'm fine with that, but my 3-year-old has just come in and he's naked,
Uh,
so I don't know.
yeah, yeah, and because it's that thing, isn't it? When you're working from home, you're still doing the same job, and you're still being as professional as you were before. And if if you're in a board meeting, or if you're in a meeting at work, you wouldn't say, "Oh, let me show you a picture of my son running around without his clothes on." You wouldn't even bring up your kids. So it's whether you need to say stuff, it's whether you need to explain why you're switching your camera off, or whether you should just be able to choose as and when you flip out or come back on again. So yeah, I mean, in the end, I said, look, it's just not a good time because my son's in the room. But I just felt this is unnecessary. This shouldn't be an expectation. I don't think that you are always visible in meetings.
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? It is complicated because you don't want to also have to explain, because in a business meeting, time is very important, and you've got to be very kind of careful with the amount of time you spend talking about other things. So
Mm,
you don't want to have to go, I'm not putting my camera on because of X, Y, and Z, and it's just fraught with all sorts of complications.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, welcome back onto the podcast,
Thank
Andy.
you. Thank you, Luke. It's
It's
been
been
a while.
Yeah, it's been ages. Do you know how long it's been? Do you know the last time you were on this podcast? Now, listeners, sort of more recent listeners to the podcast or video viewers might not have heard the episodes with you, but
Mm,
you have been in quite a few. But yeah, the
mm.
last time, do you remember when that was?
The last time was, I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was over 2 years ago now. And I was, because I remember it was a really sunny day, and I was in my office at work, and we were talking about the recent changes that had happened in my life.
Hmm.
And thinking back, if it was the summer and I was in my office, it must have been sort of June, July 2019, something like that.
Yeah, it was actually May 2019.
Okay, so
We
even
go,
longer than I thought.
yeah, but this is pre-COVID times.
Yeah,
That's the last time, and then COVID happened and stuff like that. I mean, just to help those people who haven't heard those old episodes, how do we know each other, Andy?
we don't. I don't know who you
Total
are.
strangers.
Total strangers. No, we've known each other for years. You and I used to work together at the London School of English, and I started there in 2007, I think, 2008, and you were already a teacher there, and we were teachers for a while, and then I became like the director of studies.
Did you become my
I
boss?
became your boss. Yeah, I became your boss, and I remember we did like a whole. We went to Paris, didn't we? We did a presentation there at a conference, and that was like the first time that I'd sort of spent a lot of time with you outside of work. And our girlfriends at the time came. Well, my girlfriend came to Paris with me. Your girlfriend was living in Paris, so they hung out and ate a lot of cheese and drank a lot of wine. I think they enjoyed the weekend more than we did. But yeah, you came to my wedding. Yeah, so we've known each other a long time. So even after you left London School, and I've now left London School as well, but we stayed in touch, and particularly through the podcast, talked about a lot of things. We've done other bits of training together. We did a webinar together back
Yeah,
end of, I think that was 2013, something like that, end of 2013.
I'm trying to remember what the webinar was about now.
Oh, something amazing, something incredible. No, it was all. I think it was using tech in teaching, something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, long sort of history.
And also, whenever you're on the podcast, we always end up talking about things that begin with an M. So M words, words that
Words.
begin with an M, just by
Yeah,
coincidence.
yeah, that's
What
right.
what I can think of four. Do you know what they
For
are?
um, well, I think the first time we spoke, I was doing a lot of stuff about millennials, which just it dates what I was talking about and it dates me. But millennials and how millennials are entering the workplace and how we need to adjust our courses in order to cater for their needs and all that kind of stuff. So I did a lot of research on millennials, and I think actually your listeners helped me with some of that research because I did. I sent out a Survey Monkey thing, and so that would have been the first one. And didn't we another time we went to Paris as well? I did another conference in Paris. I think you were living there then. I went with Ben Butler, who's another colleague of ours, and we recorded a podcast in the lobby of a hotel or something.
Yeah, it was quite late. It was after you'd done your
That's
talk
right.
at this conference, and yeah, we sat in the lobby of the hotel and recorded the podcast there, while sort of people sort of came and went and probably wondered what we were doing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. That was great fun with Ben Butler. Exactly.
That was just a funny trip because I know I'm getting sidetracked, but it just reminded me that do you remember when we went to the hotel and we checked in and there was no one on the front desk, and then we heard this voice, this French guy saying, "I'm stuck in the lift."
Oh yeah.
And so he said, "What's your name?" And so we told him, and he goes, "Go behind the counter and look in the book, and they'll tell you what room you're in, and then the keys are here." So there's just this voice coming from the lift, and thank God you were there because you were able to speak French to him better than we could. But it was the it was the weirdest check-in
Oh,
process,
yeah.
and it was like, "What do we
How
do?"
weird! You checked yourself in
Yeah,
while the guy on the front desk was stuck in the lift. Did he manage to get out of the lift? I don't remember. Were we podcasting while he was just
just
sitting in
banging
a
on the
lift?
doors. No, no, we came out because we went round. We got the keys and we went in. We checked everything. We dumped everything. We got changed, and we had to go out to an evening reception. And I think by the time we'd come down, he was there, and he was very sheepish and kind of apologetic. But it was just very very funny. So yeah. So anyway, back to your point. The first one was millennials. That was the first time we spoke. Oh, and then I remember the next time. Didn't we do a couple of things about marathon running?
Yes.
And my reasons, my motivation for running marathons. That was,
Yes.
yeah, that was a really interesting. That was a really good chat, actually. I really enjoyed that
Yeah.
episode. But I can't remember what else we talked about that
So we've
began
got
with an M.
millennials, marathons, moving, which was maybe the last thing because you moved from London to Canterbury, and we talked
That's right.
about
Yeah.
sort of differences between London and Canterbury. And then the fourth one is Moby,
Oh, yeah, Moby.
the fact that you are for well, people often mistake you for Moby, including a guy in an airport.
Oh, that was the worst. Yeah, that was yeah. Well, it hasn't happened very often recently. I think largely because I just haven't really been out very much over the last 18 months. Haven't done much traveling, but it used to happen a lot. I mean, it like regular, like that time in France that I was telling you about when we did the conference together. I remember we went to a restaurant or a bar or something, and as we were leaving, all these French guys looked at me and started singing a Moby song with these lovely French accents. But the time you're talking about was in an airport, and this guy came running over to me, and he goes, "I'm your biggest fan." He's this American guy. He goes, "Moby, I'm your biggest fan. I'm your biggest fan." And I was looking at him. I said, "I'm not Moby," and he looked really confused, and he went, "I know you're just saying that, but I want you to know that I'm your biggest fan." And I was with my boss at the time and another colleague, and they were just sort of standing there looking at me, going, "This is hilarious. I'm not gonna say anything." They were like my manager or my bodyguard or something. They were just pretending to go along with the whole thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, I,
He was so convinced that you were Moby that he managed to like turn these people into your bodyguards and your like tour manager.
my
Um,
entourage.
yeah, yeah. Oh my god. But okay. All right. Well, now at least listeners can see for themselves. If the myth is actually true, if you really do look like Moby, that's all.
Yeah,
But anyway, this time I thought that we would. We thought that we would talk about another M word, or in fact, potentially a few other M words. But the main
yeah.
one is sort of related to your work and something that you've been talking about and working on recently, and that is the metaverse
The
and
metaverse.
teaching
Yeah,
English and learning English through the metaverse, which is a fascinating thing. And I haven't talked about it on the podcast before. So, well, what is the metaverse, and how can people use it for learning English? Over
okay.
to you.
Well, it's a big question. Well, let me perhaps tell you a story about how I became involved in the metaverse. As we've just said, you and I met at the London School of English, and I was there for 14 years and left in the summer. And I was introduced to a company called Fluent Worlds, and really, really interesting and amazing stuff that they're doing. But basically, they teach languages in virtual, immersive 3D worlds. So I was just blown away when I first saw the tech, and I was having a meeting with the founders of the business, and they were showing me around all these environments, and I thought, this is just incredible. The applications here for learning are amazing because once you're in, one of the things about learning a language, the reason why the English language industry has sort of grown along these lines of going over to countries and immersing yourself, language learning, not just English learning, but immersing yourself in the culture and the environments, is because it's the most effective way to learn. And I think online courses really struggle to replicate that kind of level because they're quite 2D, they're quite flat, they're quite repetitive and dry. And for the first time with Fluent Worlds, I was seeing something that was so realistic and so immersive that I thought, yeah, I can see how you can have students in these environments interacting with other people and interacting with the environments and the objects within it. And it's just really going to drive their learning. So I started work there about 6 weeks ago. We're recording this, what is it today? The 1st of December. And I started working there sort of end of October. And about a week after I started, Mark Zuckerberg made this announcement to the world that he was changing the name of Facebook to Meta. And this expression metaverse, which I hadn't heard of before, was suddenly in everyone's consciousness and on everyone's lips. And essentially what the metaverse is exactly what Fluent Worlds is doing already. It's this idea that you exist in a virtual world. You have a little avatar that you can walk around and you can meet other people and you can interact. And Zuckerberg's kind of vision for this is all encompassing. It's going to change how we do meetings. So instead of being in a meeting like this where we're looking at each other, we might have our own little avatars and we can go and work collaboratively on projects. And he's also talking a lot about how it can be used for commerce, for gaming. And gaming's a good point because a lot of these virtual environments have existed in gaming for a long time. I mean, you and I both used to play a lot of Grand Theft Auto when
Hmm.
we were younger.
Hmm.
And the first time I was using Fluent Worlds, it reminded me of Grand Theft Auto. I mean, I didn't go and pick up a baseball bat or commit any crimes or anything like that, but it's a very similar kind of sandbox feel that you're walking around and you can go in all sorts of different areas and explore different areas. But it's being used in that positive sense in order to teach and learn languages.
So it's called the Metaverse, right?
It's
Yeah.
called the
So,
Metaverse, yeah.
but is there only one? I mean, so something like Fluent Worlds, do they just provide you with a way to get into the metaverse, or are there many different sort of metaverses in a sense that like the way you've got, you know, if you compare it to social media, you've got Facebook and you've got Twitter and you've got, you know, Instagram and so on, and these are not the same world, although you can kind of share things between them. So, is there one single metaverse, or are there a number of different metaverses?
Well, the term metaverse comes from a novel from 1994 called Snow Crash, which was written by Neil Stevenson. I've not read the book, but it's a science fiction writer, and the idea is that there is one metaverse that we can go and explore together. And the character in that book is called Hero Protagonist, which is quite a cool
Very
name for a
meta.
character. Very, very meta. But I think the reality is that, at least initially, there's going to be several metaverses. And the idea of a metaverse is a place where you can go and virtually interact with people. Now, ultimately, we may find that these metaverse converge. It's all becoming quite scientific already, but they might converge into one kind of shared collaborative space. And like the internet, for example, you've got to think about
Mm.
it. Think of it like the internet. You've got a number of different browsers, but ultimately it's all shared information. And I think the metaverse is a way of reinventing the internet. So everybody's going to have their own way into the metaverse. But for example, you might go into one version of the metaverse and you might go to this part of it to learn languages, or you might go to this part of it to do some shopping, or you might, you go to this part to do some gaming, for example. That's certainly how Mark Zuckerberg is envisaging it. Now, the metaverse that Fluent Worlds has is their own proprietary environments, and they've got about 50 different environments that you can explore together with other students, with teachers. And yeah, it's just really exciting because when I got the job and people were asking me about my new job, this was my explanation. So I say, okay, so what I do is I'm working for a company that offers English language training and language training in virtual immersive 3D worlds. That's a long sentence. And then after the metaverse announcement, people say, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, we do language training in the metaverse." And people get it. They're like, "Oh wow, okay, yeah, that's cool. I understand that now." Yeah. So for us, it's been a really interesting time these last few weeks because interest in what we do has really spiked, and that sort of proposition is much clearer in people's heads. And I think it's a great validation for the founders of the business. So one of the founders is Dr. Linda Bradford, and she did a PhD into immersive learning. This is about 10 years ago. And she found that the efficacy of learners in virtual environments was actually even more effective than it is in the classroom. Because instead of sitting and studying and looking at a teacher, they're actually moving around and they're doing and they're interacting with each other. So it was suddenly very, very kind of eye-opening in a sense. And she envisaged that there was a future for this kind of teaching. There was a future for this kind of learning in the metaverse. And that was 10 years ago. And Fluent Worlds have been quite successful with their language apps. So they've got these two amazing apps. The first one is called Fluent Worlds. And it's a little bit like it's like a game. So you go in, you have your little character, and you start in Central Park as a beginner of English, and you walk around and you speak to characters, and they'll ask you questions, and you have to choose the best response. And initially, it was just choosing the best response from 4 separate answers, but then they developed speech recognition software with the founder of the Amazon Echo, and so you can actually say your response. So then it starts analyzing your accent as well and gives you feedback on that. So straight away, it's something that is really very, very cool and very, very different to what's out there at the moment. On the back of that, they generated developed a second app, which is called Perfect Accent. And when you start with Perfect Accent, it maps your voice. So you say a few example sentences and it maps your voice, and then you can choose various different English areas to practice, such as business English, traveling, medical English, all those kinds of things. I think there's about 44 different categories. And it's all to do with improving your pronunciation. So the 2 apps together are great sort of self-study tools. And then this year they're launching something called Fluent Worlds Academy, which is my role to be the director of that and to grow that side of the business. And this is the live teaching side. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting and exciting area, and I've sort of happened to land right in the middle of it.
So when someone uses this particular multiverse, so we'll use Fluent Worlds as an example, when they sort of, yeah, as you said, a bit like a computer game, I guess you create your avatar and make it look like you.
Yeah.
And then when you're playing the game, what perspective is it? Is it first person perspective, or is it like, is that third person? I mean, what do you see? Do you see your character in front of you, a bit like in Grand Theft Auto, or are you? Is it first person where you are literally looking through the eyes of the character?
So there's 2 different versions. The desktop version is a bit like Grand Theft Auto in the sense that you're just behind the character, but you can change that. So you can be over the shoulder, you can be third person, or you can be first person. We've also optimized it for VR as well. So there you'll just be seeing this. If you were wearing your headset, you would be looking straight out and seeing everything that's there. And in terms of what you look like, yes, you can choose what you look like. You can choose your character. You can customize it. There's a lot of options, or you can just click a dice thing and it will create a random person for you, and you can go in as that character. There's also this very, very cool thing coming where once you set up, you can look at your webcam and it will take an image of you. And I think in about 25 seconds, it creates a 3D avatar that looks like, in my case, Moby, but it will look like you. So you can actually go in as yourself. Luka
Modric. Mine would look like Luka Modric, or I don't know who else. Probably that'll do. Luka Modric.
No, I was going to say Andy Peters, but I don't. Not Andy Peters, Andy Crane. I don't think anyone's going to know who Andy Crane is. But if you have any British listeners, they might understand who he is.
He was, just for those who don't know, he was a TV presenter on kids' TV when we were growing up, and Andy Crane used to present his show from the broom cupboard, is what they called it. It was like a tiny little studio, and he called it the broom cupboard, and he had a little puppet that would talk to him as well. Ed the Duck, wasn't it?
Ed the Duck, yeah.
So it is a bit like a broom cupboard, the place where I do this. Okay. All right, so cool. So I get the idea that it's kind of like the fact that it's somehow more adaptable, in the sense that, traditional language classrooms, as you said, you end up sitting at a desk a lot of the time. If you're a student, you end up sitting at a desk a lot of the time. It's quite a traditional structure, quite limited in the sense that often, although in classrooms these days we try to break this structure of just sitting at a desk and the teacher stands up and it's all very teacher oriented. It is possible to break that and make it more learner centered, but that's quite difficult. But intrinsically, the metaverse is much more open. And I suppose that you would imagine replicates the real world much more closely than a classroom. I'm wondering what the limitations might be for it. I mean, and also another thing I'm thinking about is like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Animatrix. Did you ever see that? It's a series of animations based on the Matrix universe, universe of the Matrix, and the Animatrix absolutely terrified me when I saw it. I was in my 20s, but it still terrified me because it one of the episodes shows you how the Matrix was created and sort
Right.
of what happened. I mean, I'm not like a technophobe or a Luddite or anything like that, but I'm sure that some people find it a little frightening, the
Mm.
idea that there is this sort of a virtual world, and that we are more and more being sucked into it or brought into it. And
Yeah.
what would you reckon? I mean, like, do you think that people are fearful about the idea of a virtual world which is potentially controlled by people, that there's a I don't know, is there something scary about it, or is that just
I,
paranoia?
I think that there's always a natural reaction to anything like this that comes along, and people. I mean, I remember our former boss at London School said to you and I think at the same time. Don't know why, but he said, "I don't want to go on Facebook. I've got real friends who I see, and I go to the pub with them."
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, fine. It's fine. It's not. There is no compulsion to go to do any of this sort of thing. What I would say, though, about the metaverse, and what I would say about Fluent Worlds in particular, is I would say that over the last 18 months to 2 years, I mean, everything has changed. Everything has changed. And almost every single one of your listeners will have experienced great change in their lives, and particularly around how we work and how we communicate. We're spending so much more time on our screens. And you can look at Fluent Worlds as another communication tool, but a very,
Hmm.
very cool one, a very, very different one. So, for example, when you're in these environments, you can also switch your webcam on, so you can still see each other if you like. We don't expect our students to do that. There's no demand for them to do that, because it gets back to my point before about how sometimes in these meetings you don't want to have your camera on. You want to be present, you want to show that you're present, and you can show that you're present by moving your character around and interacting. But you don't necessarily want people to see you. For example, you might have kids running around like I did, or you might just be having a bad hair day. Not that I would know about that, but you take my point.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, but you can switch your camera on, you can share your screen, you can do all of these different things that you would normally do on video conferencing tools. I think the difference between Teams, for example, and Zoom, though Teams is an interesting point because they're also developing Mesh, which is their version of the metaverse. So if you have a look at it afterwards, you can Google it, and they're creating avatars for everybody as well. And I think it just gives people another way of working, and it gives people a sort of more options in terms of how they wish to virtually communicate. Because even though we are seeing each other, we are still virtually communicating. But it's not seen as weird now, is it? It's not seen as weird to have a Skype call or a Zoom call or a Teams call, but it's
Mm.
still virtual communication. What we do is what the metaverse does is it adds another layer to that. And it allows you that little bit of freedom to choose how you look and choose how you interact. And I think, particularly for language learning, that's really empowering. Because do you remember when we were teachers at London School, you'd always get certain students that were so loud and they would always dominate the class. And then you'd
Hmm.
have other students that were really shy and reticent, and they'd be very nervous about speaking English. And I remember once there was a student a Japanese guy who was very, very quiet, very, very reticent, and in my class. And then out of the class, I saw him speaking with two other Japanese people, and the other two were just in hysterics. They were laughing at everything he said, And I realized, oh wow, this guy's got something about him. He's got this sort of he's a real character. He's a real funny guy, but for some reason he shuts down when he moves into English. And what we saw when we had to move a lot of our courses online at the London School last year was how a lot of these shyer students really blossomed in virtual environments, because
Mm.
there's that sort of that fourth wall, if you like, between us now and between the students. And those students that would dominate and were louder, they found it actually they respected more the turn taking element of being in a virtual classroom. Now, being in the metaverse gives you another layer, because you can create your own avatar that looks like you if you want, or you don't have to. If you want to have green hair and wear a dress, that's absolutely fine. You can do all of those things because it's all about self-expression. And I think what the metaverse does is it puts a lot of creativity back in the hands of the learner. They can have so much more control about how they appear, how they interact, and so on.
Do you reckon the skills that you learn learning English in the metaverse can be applied to the real world? Is there,
Absolutely, yeah.
you reckon?
Yeah,
'Cause-
well, to give you an example, I was doing a thing last week where I was walking somebody through our virtual airport, and we were talking about, if you were going to do a lesson on business travel, for example, or travel in general,
Mhm.
let's talk about all the different ways we could use this environment. So we walked over to the self check-in desks, and then we were saying, okay, so what kind of things do you need at this stage? Okay, you need your passport, you need your baggage, and okay, and what's that thing behind the self check-in desk? It's the baggage, it's the conveyor belt, you know,
Yeah.
all of those things. So you can elicit this vocabulary, and you're seeing it and you're doing it. And then we walked up the stairs, and I was like, so what would you normally do now when you're at the airport if you have time? And we'll go for a coffee. So we walked across to the coffee shop, and we sat down and we talked about coffee for a little while. Then we went through into the thing, and there was things like currency exchange. There was we looked up at the signs on the ceiling. So in airports, because you're dealing with international travelers, you have fixed kind of signs. So there's like a picture of a guy in a hat pointing, and he's like, that means the security control. Then
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
picture of money, and that's currency exchange. So it's eliciting all of this kind of language from the learner, and then saying, but this is what it is in English, etc., etc. And then it carries on. Then you go through the scanners. So I was saying to the teacher, you could teach prepositions here. So do you go over the scanner? Do you go under the scanner? Do you go through the scanner? What does your bag do? All those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
feel at this stage? And you elicit stories and you elicit experiences. And so all of this stuff means that when the student next finds themselves in that situation, they're much better equipped because they've seen it and they've done it. So instead of seeing a bunch of words on a piece of paper and trying to remember them, you're actually seeing that vocabulary in action. You're actually feeling it and you're using it as you go. And that's incredibly powerful. And another thing that Mark Zuckerberg said about the metaverse, he said education won't look anything like education currently looks in the metaverse. And I think that was one of the most salient points he made in his whole presentation. And the lessons that we're running in Fluent Worlds don't look anything like the lessons that you and I would have taught at the London School, or we would have taught online. And I think it's the best way to describe it is you're taking students with you on a journey. You're taking them with you through these environments. And there's so many learning points and rich kind of content that you bring out. And for the teacher, it's about having a lesson plan, of course, but it's more about understanding where everything is in the environment, and then taking students to all those different points and having them, creating discussions and creating learning moments around each of those points. It's very, very cool. You can tell I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it sounds really great. And I suppose there are moments when if it's necessary, you can sort of go to a more traditional classroom environment where
Yeah,
you can, if you want, you can have a whiteboard. If you want to like do language feedback, or if you want to, you know, detail some grammar points or something like that, the possibilities are
yeah,
really open that you can just essentially start putting words on the screen in front of them
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
and showing
So
them
you've
different
got
things.
different tools. Yeah, you've got a chat box, so you can put vocabulary in there. In each of the environments, we have these big screens. So, for example, you'll be walking down the strip in Las Vegas, and there's a huge big billboard, and that's
Yeah.
one of our share screens. So you can put video content there. You can use it as a whiteboard. You can put slides. You can put anything on there, and
Hmm.
then the really cool thing that the teacher has, he's got two really cool things. The first one is you can recall students from wherever they are. So if they've run off to the other side of Las Vegas and you don't know where they are, you can just click a button and everyone flies in towards you, and then you're all assembled around the screen, so you can bring people back and focus them.
You can
In the
assemble
same,
everyone with a button, just like
exactly, Avengers
students
Assemble.
assemble.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. And the other really cool thing, and I've never seen this on any other product, but there's something called proximity voice. And one day, Luke, I'll invite you into the metaverse, and you and I can do a podcast from there.
Yeah.
But But what you can do is you've got global voice. So everybody in your class, say you've got 10 students in your class, can hear you. If you put proximity voice or nearby voice on, it creates like a little bubble, if you like, around you, and everyone within that bubble can hear you. But if you walk out of that bubble, you get quieter and quieter. Okay, that's my miming for you. So that's really clever, because if you think about if you ever had a lesson in Zoom or Teams, you've got to use breakout rooms. In Fluent Worlds, you can say to students, so let's say you're in Las Vegas, you say, okay, I want you to go over there and stand by the fountains of the Bellagio. I want you guys to come over here and stand outside this cafe here. And in each group, they'll be able to hear each other, but they won't be able to hear everyone else. So it's a really clever way of doing group work in a virtual environment, or pair work, rather.
Yeah, it's like just mapping everything into a physical space. Yeah, it's fascinating. Where do you think it's going to go in the future? What do you think is going to happen in sort of 5, 10 years or more?
Good question. I think it's going to revolutionize the way we teach. I really think that the traditional methods of online teaching and the traditional, particularly the asynchronous courses, those self-study ones where you're doing endless flashcards and learning words and repeating and filling in sentences, all those kinds of things. I think the days for those kinds of courses are numbered, because I think that what we have here is a great tool to bring people together in a sort of as a very realistic environment. So we can have students from all over the world who, for whatever reason, cannot travel. And you know what? This was happening before the pandemic anyway. We were seeing a rise, an increase in virtual learning anyway. I mean, the pandemic just sped that thing up in terms of how we teach and how we learn. I think there's always going to be face-to-face teaching, but this is going to be the next best thing. And in many ways, it's going to be even more effective because of all of those reasons I've just outlined. The fact that it puts you in environments that you can genuinely practice. We've got a hotel lobby, for example, to teach hospitality English. We've got a doctor's office to teach medical English. We've got all of these cool environments, and we can create environments for people as well. So we just recently agreed a deal with a big school in Egypt, and they wanted us to build a couple of environments for their young learners. So we built like a farmyard. And it's brilliant. You go in and there's stables with horses and cows, and there's a barking dog and so on. And, you can walk around and then you can click on something and it will tell you what it is. It'll give you the word. And it's got all of the, being a farm, we've got all these crops planted as well. So you can click on it and it will say tomato, and then it will give you more information and it will teach you how to pronounce it and so on. So it's just this amazing matrix style learning environment that we can kind of get lost in. And there's a couple of other things, because it's also gamified. Everything, I think gamifying things makes it much more engaging as well. So in our environments, there are things that you can do that you wouldn't normally be able to do in the real world. For example, you can fly. So cool. If you need to get from one part to another quite quickly, you can go up into the air, you can fly around, you can go and find people. And even like when you're doing pair work, you can say, right, you two, I want you to fly up there. And then you'll hear each other, but we won't be able to hear you down here on the ground. So things like that. It just makes it really creative, really, really fun.
It's amazing. Yeah. It does. It just sort of, makes me wonder how it will change the world and how it's going to change human experience and what our everyday life will be like when you have this kind of thing going on to, at a large level. I mean, we're already quite deeply connected to the online world, in the sense that we spend a lot of our time, you just see a lot of the people on their phones looking at things. They're in Facebook, they're on Twitter, or wherever it is, on whatever social network they're looking at. And just like, just to project that to the point where when the metaverse or online worlds have become a lot more sophisticated, it's not, I mean, I wonder what it's going to look like in the real world, which is kind of why I refer to the Matrix, because obviously that is a very fearful version of basically the ultimate point being that just people are in pods directly connected to the central nervous system, and they don't realize it either. They've kind of like the separation has gone. Like people don't realize it, and there's the sense that someone else is in control, and people are being exploited in the most sort of deep way. That I just wonder how it's going to look. How's this going to change a person's everyday life? I don't know if that's a question that you can answer.
Well, it'll change people's everyday life in the same way the internet did. I think the internet has changed people's lives in a whole bunch of ways, and what the metaverse does is I think it just increases connectivity in another way, in a sort of a more human way in many respects, because the whole thing, we've done a lot of work, you and I have done a lot of work around not just language training, but communication training.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you've got those visual clues when you speak to somebody. And I think that learning in the metaverse is going to do that as well. You're going to be able to read body language. You're going to be able to pick up on the visual clues of the other avatars in there. Now, one of the things that Mark Zuckerberg kept saying in his presentation is a lot of this hasn't been built yet. A lot of this doesn't exist yet. And he was quite open in saying, we don't really know exactly what it's going to look like. But, the more you read about it, I don't think it's something that's a fad. I don't think it's something that's going to go away. Mm-hmm. And I think, the power of it is immense. So getting back to when Fluent Worlds was first built. So Dr. Linda Bradford did a research project, and they built a very early version of these virtual environments. And they took students through a semester. They were art students. And at the end of this experiment, they assessed them, and all of them, or most of them, made improvements. And there were some outliers. There were some that didn't improve as much, or they were much lower than expected. But there were some that were much higher than expected. And so she followed up with all of these outliers. And there was one guy in particular, a guy in Scotland. And she said, congratulations, you've completed this program, and you did exceptionally well. I just want to understand is there anything different about your circumstances to anyone else? And he said, well, throughout the whole semester, I have been in a hospital bed recovering from an operation. And what I loved about learning in the metaverse and learning in your virtual worlds was that none of my peers, none of the other students knew any of that about me. They just saw a character moving around and walking around and interacting. And so that sort of transformational power is really, really impressive. The fact that it's a leveler in many respects. And that's what virtual communication, if it's done properly, can do for you.
Yeah, it can make it a level playing field. Like you said, about the Japanese guy. I mean, or it doesn't have to be Japanese. It could be anyone who's sort of like socially less comfortable in an actual room where you've got people whose voices are louder or more physically dominant or whatever it is, that it can sort of level that playing field somehow. Yeah. I just the thought occurs to me, like, who's in charge though? Who's in charge of the metaverse? Again, I can't get my head out of science fiction films I've seen, but that's just one part of the whole picture.
But I think it's going to be balance, isn't it? It's like anything, I'm going to finish this call with you. I'm going to go outside and go running. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's a bit cold, but it is about balancing your screen time and your family time and your real life time. But ultimately, how we work and how we live is going to be much more virtual. I don't know. I mean, I haven't been into the office for my new employer because they're an American company, so I don't know when I'll actually go and visit them. But I hadn't been into the offices of London School. I think I went once in the last 10 months that I was there, and it didn't impact on how I do my job. I'm still able to do what I do, and I'm still able to be effective in what I do. And of course, there are times where you miss that collaborative side of things, of being with people. But
you don't have to wear trousers, so
but I am wearing trousers.
I am too, listeners. But if I could have not if I'd wanted to.
I mean, I'm wearing comfortable trousers. Let's be clear. I'm wearing, tracky dacks, but it's that's still
Tracky dacks, tracky beads,
tracky bees. Yeah, tracky dacks.
tracksuit bottoms.
Mm.
Viewers, listeners, that's what that means. Okay, very, very interesting stuff, and I love the offer of recording a podcast in the Matrix. I mean, Metaverse. Anytime. That would be really cool. It would be a really interesting thing. I guess it's possible to like record the video for that as well, so we could do a whole.
Yes. Well, we've been talking at work about creating a podcast or a metacast, and we're looking at doing sort of 30-minute episodes where you will be in the environment as your avatar, and it will be like this, but we'll be doing it virtually. We can have our webcams on as well, but we're just figuring out how you then film within each environment. So we're going to build a virtual podcast studio. So yeah, we'd love to have you on.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Or maybe we can do a collab. But the other thing I was going to say about this is please do have a look at fluentworlds.com or Google Fluent Worlds Academy, because we're going to be running a holiday promotion. So I think, your listeners, if you're interested in this and you're interested in learning a little bit more about what the metaverse is and how it can help you with your language learning, please do come along and visit us. So are we okay to share the links at the end of the podcast?
We'll put the links in I'll put the links in the description. Yeah.
Awesome.